And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of Sass and the Beard here on River Valley Now. I'm Nathan George, and this is my good friend Kristen Foster, and we are the Sass and the Beard, and we are here to talk to you about all things going on in our local political environment here in the River Valley area. And so last week, Kristen, you got to hang out with Quorum Court member Jennifer Sloan.
I did. It was very fun. Mm-hmm. We had a good time talking about stuff. You probably were out having more fun than we were, but we got to talk about good local politics. So
I was on the beach eating tons of crab legs.
I told everybody you were doing hot girl shit. It was true.
Yes, I definitely was doing that. Before we get started, in the bottom right corner, we were encouraged to do this by some of our viewers and by the folks here at RVN. You may be seeing a little Cash App handle there. We are not asking you to donate, but if you feel inclined, please, there's the information there, and we greatly appreciate it. We've had several people donate because this is our part-time job.
Hobby, so, yeah. It's like a hobby that turned into a job, kind of, but without all the benefits.
Yes, so... But that's there for those of you if you would like to take a minute to go through Cash App. So, Kristen, coming up, we've got a couple of municipal meetings coming up in the next, this week, and then, the regular city and county meetings are next month, mm-hmm. but which is soon. But we do want to talk about some fun stuff today, or not necessarily fun, but later, after the break, we're going to talk about the Slumlord Thousandaire in our community and some of the crazy things going on, because recently within the city there's been discussion about changing some of the codes for renters, and we're wanting to keep a spotlight on that for all of you. But first, tonight, right now, the City Council has a special called meeting to talk about adding some additional bays for airplanes to the airport. And I know that sounds very exciting to most of you because we all have a private jet that we need to park somewhere.
Yes, I keep my plane over in Dardanelle. Do you remember that time, though?
It's cheaper to house it in Yale County.
It really is. It's cheaper to house everything in Yale County. Do you remember that time, though, that I was almost in a band at the airport? It was your band. They had Rockin' the Runway out there. I tell y'all, Keith Frazier,
we love Keith.
He's the director of the airport. Yeah. He does such great work. Mm-hmm. And that's part of why we wanted to talk about this, is yes. Even though the airport is not something most of us are probably going to use.
Or familiar with.
Unless you go out there for a fundraiser for yes. Rockin' the Runway. Mm-hmm. I have no musical talent, but I was taking pictures with the band like I was a member. And... But Keith does a great job, yes. And he's been really working to expand it. And, even though it's not something that we generally use, there are businesses that use that regularly to bring in executives. We saw it get a lot of action around the casino. Right. And so, it is an asset to our community, and it's great to see it grow.
Yes, and in the process of growing could lead to more growth. You see this in business all the time. You see this in development within cities when money starts getting spent to add new things. Other things are sometimes come along and add to potential. And that's the biggest issue with this situation here, is that the city would have to front some money. But there is a huge grant. There are several grants available that would cover 2/3 of the cost of this project. So it's basically $660,000. And the city would have to pay $260,000, and the other $400,000 would come from these grants. And the work being done would be contingent upon getting those grants. So if the airport did not get the grants, then there would be no money spent out of the city's pocket. And there is money available for these. There are several ways, whether it be through economic development or other funds that the city has available. The airport could even raise money to do those kind of things. So there are several options available for that. So this meeting they're having tonight is to decide whether or not the city wants to spend that money in lieu of those grants forthcoming.
And it's not clearly decided going in. There's kind of some division on the council about that issue.
I know
so
the mayor has said that he was for this. Obviously, the director of the airport, is Keith, who's a friend of mine, and I think is done a great service to our community in running that airport for many years. So
I know I want to poach Keith to run for office.
Yeah.
He's great. He's fantastic. He's a real asset to our community that we don't even people don't even realize we
right.
have.
Yes.
But he's doing great work out there. But they did say that some of the hangars that if they do this project, they pretty much already have the hangars rented or however that works.
There are planes that could already go in the hangars. So it is a need, whether or not it's a necessity. That's for the city council to decide.
Yeah, and maybe there are better ways to spend that money. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's $250,000. That's
a lot of money,
that's a lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they could be getting the Sass and the Beard plane, so that we could have a way to travel. I mean,
listen, for $250,000, they could hire us to play by play everything. City council meeting and thing that they do. They probably wouldn't want that, but
they probably only do that if we stop talking about them.
Can you imagine just a whole local ESPN type channel for political commentary?
Oh man, that'd be awful. That'd be awful. Everybody would be so mad all the time. So that meeting's happening tonight. We don't know the results yet because it's going on probably right now.
Yes.
And probably it's over by now, I bet. But they didn't have the live stream up that I saw, so we'll just have to follow up and get minutes on that. There's quorum court meeting coming up on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, so they're going to talk about this anti-casino ordinance. They're going to be talking about raising the sales tax 1% for the Justice Complex.
Wait, didn't we just do that? Didn't we just
the city extended?
No. We tried to do the bond
but the
for
bond,
the Justice Complex.
The bond for the Justice Complex, but that wasn't a tax.
No.
It would have probably translated into a tax, considering the current casino situation that we are in. But I do remember several quorum court members, and maybe even Judge Cross himself, saying the words, "We don't want to have to raise taxes." And it looks like that's, probably what they're going to try to do. Now, again, not saying that there aren't some needs within the county structure and infrastructure. There obviously are. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have money for those needs, but we had a pretty good setup for working with an entity that was coming into our area, and will be potentially now coming into our area. Maybe we could work with another entity, even though it wasn't the one we wanted, and maybe not have to raise taxes to pay for a jail system. I found it very interesting with the conversation we had earlier about the sewage system in the current jail, and that sometimes some inmates will run shirts or sheets or things through the toilet system, and they end up in the city somewhere, coming up in some sort of sewage area, and it's always the same area.
Yeah.
And so we know that it's been happening, and there's not much going to be done. Basically, it's well, it doesn't have Pope County correctional facility so that we're not going to deal, anyway, you explained it a lot better. Yeah.
Well, okay, so, the Justice Complex, the jail we have now, was not, from what I understand, was not built by folks who specialize in jails, in building those kind of facilities, which takes some special, equipment and planning and all kinds of things, right? And so I guess in most jails they have a grinder that grinds up stuff that may get flushed by inmates or or whatever, to prevent this issue, because this is very common. But our jail doesn't have that. And so that stuff just kind of goes into the sewage system and then backs up in this area where there's like a bend in the pipes and just overflows. And so City Corp has had to go out and like take a rake and like pull that stuff out of there. Somebody's not getting paid enough. I can already guarantee you that. And so there's been this kind of argument between the city and the county of like, okay, this is costing a lot of money. It's disgusting. What do we need to do about this? And, to replace the grinder would be very expensive, especially on a building that we need to replace anyway. So they'd come up with a solution to just kind of pay on a per incident basis if they pull it out and it's definitely from the jail and not like a sheet somebody flushed from like Flying J. I don't know. That was the argument, that maybe some of this is coming from Flying J. I don't know who's flushing stuff at Flying J, but apparently people do things with toilets that I wasn't aware of.
Oh. I imagine, I don't even want to get into that discussion.
Oh, it was funny in the meetings because the quorum court members, you can tell some of them are a little squeamish.
Yeah.
And it was pretty entertaining.
But let's not miss the fact that there is going to be a discussion about raising the county sales tax by 1%.
Yes, and it's important for folks to know about this because right now we don't really have much information on what that proposal might look like. There was a budget meeting tonight to kind of discuss this, and then it'll be referred to the council or to the quorum court. Now, something like this would have to go to a vote of the people. Mm-hmm. It's not something they could do on their own, yes. just done. But I think because of the incident that happened with the bond, it's going to be important for folks to pay attention to this and make sure that we're getting what we need, and that we're not getting carried away and going overboard, which kind of seemed to be some of what was happening last time. But that we're making smart choices with our finances for our county, because this is a huge project,
right?
And it's a necessary project. There are legitimate issues with the jail here. Now, I don't know enough about that to say whether the only option is to build a new justice complex or if there are ways to repair it. But there are also issues with the 911 center, which is there. And so, there are some very legitimate things that need to be taken care of. And so I'm not necessarily even opposed to a 1-cent sales tax increase to take care of that, if it's being done in a way that's responsible and conservative with our finances, because that's not something we need to be just like, let's just have the biggest, fanciest thing we could have.
Yeah.
Because we just saw, one of the big arguments with the Justice Complex is that the jail is always overcrowded. Mm-hmm. But we just saw during COVID that they can reduce those numbers very rapidly by not incarcerating people for petty offenses and for nonviolent minor stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I think that there's a balance here that you can strike between, making the improvements we need, but not over incarcerating people and harming lives unnecessarily just to pack beds, you know? And I don't mean that to be
no,
condemning.
I agree with you.
I respect the work that they're doing over there. It's a hard job. But
yes. There's a reason that not a lot of people want to be police officers or county patrol officers or anything like that, because it's hard work and it's a lot of
it's dangerous.
Grueling. It's dangerous. So we don't want to provide any level of disrespect to that job at all. But the thought process is, if we don't have to have as crowded a facility, maybe we could spend money on not a full justice complex where it's got brand new courthouses and other area meetings and highest levels of technology. Where are we spending all this money on this place? Which, if you had all the money to spend, would you even still want that kind of place? Or do we need that kind of place in our community? Or can we just have a new jail? Or can we fix the jail that we have now? State of the art, make it state of the art. These are things that the quorum court should be able to decide, but the people get to make the decision about whether or not the taxes are raised.
And people should have the opportunity to give input on this as well at meetings. So, you can attend the quorum court meetings. They're on the first Thursday of the month. And, they're open to the public. You sign up to comment if you want to say something. You can also email your quorum court members.
Was there a discussion about a time change for the meetings?
That was on the personnel committee agenda tonight. I don't know the details on it, but there may be. The meeting used to be like at 5 o'clock, like right at 5 o'clock. So, if you were working till 5, you had to hustle to get over there. And you couldn't make it for a budget meeting because they happened beforehand. But they bumped it to later so that people could be there. I think the argument has been that, there's not that many people that actually show up to the meetings that aren't county employees. And so the county employees just end up, and the JPs and everybody just end up being there later. And it's not really necessarily providing the public access that they had thought it would. But I would argue that if an issue comes up, like a sales tax or a casino or whatever, having those meetings at a time that's accessible, it does become important at different points. We just saw it in Washington County. They had a very controversial ordinance come up last night or the night before, and they were packed in there. Most of their court meetings have nobody.
Yeah.
But that one had hundreds of people.
They even kicked some people out.
That
were not really...
Kicked a preacher out.
They were just dissenting. There was not a lot of... Anyway, I don't want to get involved in
that.
This is not the Washington County.
It's not, but let me tell you, I watched that video last night, and it made me, even though we've had frustration here, our JPs have never done that. You know what I mean? They've never... been that heavy-handed with people who
somebody just standing there talking,
caring about the community.
It wasn't like people were yelling and screaming and cussing them out. They were just literally saying, "We don't agree with this."
Yeah, we got problems in Pope County, but it could be worse.
Yeah. So also at the quorum court meeting, the Arkansas Department of Transportation, they want to petition the ADT to change a section of the county road at Center Valley.
Highway 7 out by Center Valley Road, yeah.
Gotcha. To be the Sheriff J.B. Winters Memorial. I guess highway.
Memorial Highway.
Yeah, and so that will be something...
A positive thing.
And then that's it really for the next quorum court meeting, unless they add something... random at the last minute, which we'll keep you appraised of. And then when we're about to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about slumlords and more city council stuff. And we will get to any questions that you guys have regarding that after the break.
Listen, this guy, he's over here feeling guilty about stuff he says in his head that he doesn't actually say out loud. When you keep the quiet part in, it's okay. It doesn't count.
Yeah, no, it's good that I keep it in, because if I said it out loud, everybody'd be like, oh.
But then you don't have to feel bad about it.
Yeah, well, I still do.
You're such a good guy.
All right, let's talk about slumlords.
Man.
Really just one.
Really? Okay. It's so it's not the only slumlord.
Truth.
There are some folks here.
Yes.
This is just probably the most notorious. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to talk about this because we've been covering this issue with the city council voting down the rental maintenance code.
Yes.
But I had done a video about that and talked about this issue that was raised at city council about the lack of enforcement. When code enforcement does go out and say, hey, there's a violation, then there's no...
what happens
after that? Yeah.
There's no forcing to fix. There's no assistance to the people who live there. There's no help from the city to continually go back and say, hey, this needs to be done. Mostly because there's not a lot written into the law in the city, which one of the additional aspects of those kind of 4 areas that the maintenance codes were going to be adjusted was some weight to legal ramifications for people who broke those laws. And what we're going to show you tonight are pictures of facilities where people are living that already are breaking the current codes. So this is not like something that would be additionally affected by new rules.
Some of them are. There were some that were things that, would be changed under these new rules. But so what happened to lead to this was I made a video on my personal page kind of talking about what happened at the meeting, and this woman like messaged me just chewing my ass about how wrong I was about the enforcement around this issue, and about what had been said was that Chuck Frankhouse had gone before Judge Bourne like 50 times and never really been held accountable other than like once. And they were like, you are just a liar, because they couldn't find it online, I guess. So I sent an FOI request because I was like, well, I'm not a liar, so I'll see what's up. And I was worried that, you know, I needed to maybe go back far enough to make sure that I got some records. And then I found out that I didn't really have to go back that far.
Yeah.
So I'm back 5 years. And I requested all of the code enforcement violations for this one property owner, Chuck Frankhouse, who's pretty well known in the community for owning sort of lower rent housing units that are generally not upkept all that well. He just had an issue with the city on a permit for one of his buildings, and they're now in a lawsuit over this. So, y'all, seriously, like, just take a minute.
Was also recently arrested.
Was recently arrested for something he did to a renter, yes, with stealing their property, charged with a felony. And so, y'all, okay, 5 years. Just take a minute. I mean, I know we can't do all this.
We're not going to show you all, but we got several.
But listen, 5 years, how many code violations do you think? Like, take a guess in your head of how many code violations you think this one landlord got in Russellville city limits in 5 years. 200 code enforcement violations over the last 5 years. I mean, insane. And so I've asked Maddie to put up some video or some pictures of some of these properties that came through with our FOI request to the city. You know, properties where there are repeated incidents where the city code enforcement officers have said this is a risk to life and safety, that there are major fire hazards in places like this, in apartments and in housing units that don't even have smoke detectors in them.
Yeah, but I mean, that doesn't even have a ceiling. So what good is a smoke detector going to do?
Yeah, and I mean, people are paying rent.
Yeah, people are paying to live here.
And, I mean, this is just horrific.
Yeah.
You know, and this is not because... And make no mistake, these are not properties where, oh, there's just not enough money to be able to afford things. You know, one of the residents that's at issue with the city right now is a unit that has 8 different, like, small, like, one little like, efficiency units in it. It's like one big house with 8 units in it. Just for that one house that is in terrible condition, Mr. Frankhouse is bringing in approximately $5,000 a month in rent on that one facility, according to his own account of what the rent is for that building. And so, you know, these are houses that he paid $15,000, $20,000 for, maybe $50,000 for in the 90s, and then has rented them ever since in conditions like this that people in our community are living in. And then we hear landlords come to these meetings and city council members even say that, well, nobody cares about this issue. They're not showing up to talk about it, so they must not have a problem with it. They don't really care. And, I mean, if you're living in a house that's falling down around your ears, showing up to the city council meeting just isn't the highest priority.
Yeah, I'm not very... if I heard a city council member say that to me, I would have very harsh words for them. Because it's your job to care. It's your job as a city council member to care about this. There are rules, there are things that go on that are hurting your constituents, and it's your barking job to care about this. And if you don't think other people care about it, it doesn't matter. Like, you're not elected because people care about a specific issue. Maybe you think you are, but your job is not to only focus on what people care about. Your job is to focus on the problems going on in your freaking community. And this is obviously an issue.
Yeah, I mean, this house that's shown right now, or I think there's a little bit of a delay, but yeah, this is right across from the library. I mean, you know, kids are out in this neighborhood, walking around, riding their bikes. I mean, you know, this is a health hazard.
Yeah.
And the city has sent repeated threats to say that you can't have people live here, that we're gonna just
Condemn
level
the
this
buildings,
house, condemn this house, that we'll have to just level it because it's dangerous, and then just keeps making it work to keep them open and keep moving people in. And until the state law takes effect, they don't even have a recourse to break their lease if they find out that the place they live is really not habitable.
Yeah, if it's been condemned, they still, like, it doesn't matter. Like, they can't break the lease.
Thanks for showing those, Maddie. It's a really serious issue, and when we see like code enforcement coming in and saying this is not safe for humans to live in, that this is like one of the notes said this is a serious risk to life.
Yeah.
I mean, how is this acceptable to us as a community?
Yeah.
And so part of why we wanted to talk about it tonight is, not to trash this individual necessarily, but to say that if people don't know about this, you should.
Yeah.
Because it's being decided.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, but when one council member looks at this and says, okay, what can I do in my position as a council member to help, and creates an addendum to an ordinance to say we want to add these basic functions of living to our code enforcement and provide penalties really for in a situation like this. Like, not for the regular everyday renters that are following regular everyday codes, but like for these situations. And yet it isn't passed because you've got city council members who own rental property, and you've got realty companies who are fighting it because they don't want to spend an extra $5,000 to $20,000 a year on whatever extra. And I get, like, those expenses are, that's a lot of money, but not necessarily would be for an individual. But come on, like, this is not for the everyday property owners who are doing their best to follow the rules. And like this, we have to be able to say there are basic standards of living that we have to adhere to, and our state's not doing the job, the county's not doing the job, the city's not doing the job. And so who are we as people who want to live in a place? Who do we turn to when there are no rules, or even if there are rules, they're not being enforced? And just my heart goes out to people living in those situations. Like, people say, well, get a better job or get a better place to live. Or, okay, like, that doesn't fix this. Like, to do that right now in this, you have to pay deposits, you have to get out of your lease, you have to do all of these things. Well, maybe they shouldn't have got in that place in the first. Okay, maybe that was the only thing they could find available. Like, this is not, let's not worry about what happened to get to this point. Let's fix the problem in general. Man. Yeah, I'm furious about this situation.
I know, it's the closest I've ever heard you come to saying the F word, and I think he said farkin'.
I did. That's the way that my dad came up with when I was like 14.
I think that counts because it was very close, and I think it was totally deserved because it is a farkin' mess. But it is a serious issue, and it's part of the reason that we do this is to say, like, that this is something that's affecting the life and health and safety of people who are paying their bills,
yes,
who are working, who are doing the things they're supposed to do. They just don't make enough money to have a nicer place.
Yeah.
And even though they're paying, this is the situation they're in. I went last week and talked to tenants in some of his units, went up and knocked on the door and just had a conversation about what it's like, if they have issues. And they talked about the mold in their apartments and how bad it is and how hard it is to get repairs. And just how dangerous some of it is. And it's, if the issue is that it's not being enforced by the district court, then there are methods to handle that. If we need to take that issue to judicial discipline, then maybe we need to do that.
Or we need to elect new officials that are in those positions. Those when, every time the judge or whatever, position comes open, there's not a lot of people running. It's the same person over and over. And when it comes to city council members, or like this issue to me is way more important than a casino. Like, this issue to me is way more important than whether or not we're a pro-life city. Like, if we're a pro-life city, then we better start producing some real habitable situations for people who are already alive. That's bullshit. Like, in my opinion, this situation is way more important than any of the other highly controversial issues we've been talking about in our community. And it is upon our city, county, and district judicial officials to get their shit together and fix this problem. And that's all. I'm not going to say any more about it.
No, you're going to say more about it because we got more to say. We're not done here.
In anger.
And we have a bunch of comments. My thing wasn't updating there for a second, I guess. So I'm going to update this again and check our comments because we do have quite a few. Yeah. Everybody's really proud of you. And I am
for
too.
not saying the F word.
Well, no, for speaking up because this is an important issue. And it's an issue that so often affects people who don't have a voice.
Yes.
You know, they don't have a place at the table to come and say, because they don't, it's like, I've worked with folks and I've lived in poverty. Like, I've been through some of these experiences, and it's just the priorities in your day-to-day are not the same when you are one flat tire away from a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Than when you're...
Yeah, and like half the people that live, like literally 53% of all people in the United States are a $500 emergency away from being broke. And like, that's terrible. So, like, you can't afford to fix your own place where you live that you rent, who your renter is supposed to be fixing. Like, there was a situation with one of the renters at this place that said, I'll even do the work if you just buy the materials.
The sheetrock, yeah.
And, like, he wouldn't even provide materials.
Yeah. To deal with mold.
Yeah.
To, like, in somebody's home that's affecting their lives. And people have died from this. It's a real issue. And I, don't want to like browbeat people with it, but this is something that's going to come back before our city council, and it's going to come back again, as we continue to work on this. And it's just something people need to be aware of because it's not something that one body is going to be able to fix. You know what I mean? Like, yes. The city council can't fix every part of this, but they can take their first steps.
Yes.
To fix some of it.
They can set the standard to say, when this happens, we're going to provide X amount of money fine. And then we're going to go after legally in the court system, and we're going to put pressure upon the court system to get it done. And then it is upon the court system to get it done. And then if it doesn't work, then we, as a public, put pressure on the court system to get it done. And we are so used to, this is in our... Right now, we're looking at this thing, that these things get left behind because they're long processes. And politics is a long game. You have to play the long game politically to get stuff done. And if you're not willing to do that, if you're just there because you want to have the spotlight of being on the city council, or because you want to be in the room when decisions are made so that you can make sure that your own vested interests are okay, then get out. Like, don't do the work. Do something else. I was extremely disappointed in the two council members that didn't even allow that to get to, or the three council members that didn't even allow that to get to a vote. I was very upset with them, and I haven't called my council member yet because he was one of them. Because I'm really angry and I didn't want to say things that I would regret. Plus, I went on vacation. So.
Well. From a few people who've told me they reached out to them, they quit answering their phone. Okay, so you didn't miss much. Because I had several people call me to say, like, hey, I want to make sure I understand the issue. I'm going to call my council member, and then text me and say they didn't take my call. Mm-hmm. So y'all answer your phones. If you are concerned about this issue, if you see these properties, and they are problematic, you can call the city code enforcement. There's also a place on the city website to make reports. If you're a renter, I would encourage you to have someone else call on your behalf, just to protect yourself a little bit.
Yeah.
And something else I'd like to say, because one of the things, the feedback I got from folks a lot when I was out going to some of these properties and just talking to renters, neighbors would come up and talk to me. And a lot of times neighbors had frustration with the tenants. And in some cases, very legitimate frustrations with the behavior of tenants or, situations that were happening. And I can understand that those things, may be frustrating. and my goal here is not to badmouth anybody who's necessarily renting, or even to say like we should just condemn all these properties, because there are people here who need affordable housing. But,
or condemning property owners in general. Like,
I mean,
have a right to those, but there are already protections.
Oh, there's lots of protections
for property owners. For the landlords. But, if somebody, regardless of if somebody is got problems, whatever, if they're paying their rent, they shouldn't have to live with mold in their apartment. They shouldn't have to be at a risk of dying from a fire because there is a hole in the ceiling and exposed wires hanging out and shit like that we're seeing in these reports. It's just horrific. Yeah.
And if you're paying that money, if there's people in this unit paying this man $5,000 a month, they deserve to at least get the sheetrock they were promised when they cut the fucking mold out of their closet.
Yeah.
I mean, it just is ridiculous that we are even having this issue, and mold is one of the things that has been a huge issue in this debate around the rental standard of how we're going to handle mold.
Yes.
So
I do want to just say the people at Code Enforcement are working really hard to organize and to take things from the past and make sure that it's all accurate and digitally available, and they are doing their best to make sure that in as much as can be enforced is getting enforced. They've restructured a whole lot. It's one of the things I appreciate about our current mayor is that he has kind of tried to streamline that section of the administrative office. And so they're doing a great job there. That's how we got this information, is because they had it. And they had been keeping up with it.
They're not just going in when there's complaints. I mean, you can see in the reports that they're going by when they see that the grass is 10 inches high and going up and saying, hey, this is a problem. So it's definitely not criticism of our code enforcement officers. They have been doing a very good job from everything I've heard, as well as the city planner and the folks involved from that side. Kim said that she talked to her representative and that he said that the issue had been before the council 5 times, including 2 public comment workshops. Apparently nobody but landlords attended. He said the code enforcement is the main problem. Well, that's not true, because I attended both of them.
Oh, court enforcement.
Court enforcement is problem. I was in the workshops that nobody but landlords attend. Well, that's not true, because I was there.
Yeah, I know
and so
a person,
several.
There were ex-renters that were there that I know that spoke.
Part of the reason, though, that it may have primarily been landlords is because they requested the workshop. It's not like it was scheduled and then just promoted far and wide.
Yeah.
They asked for it so they could tear apart the ordinance. And then...
I wonder if I could just request a workshop.
No, we wouldn't get one.
We can't. It's an Assassin the Beard can't just request
I want Assassin the Beard workshop. Let's have a workshop on transparency. But what I would say, though, on the issue of the court's enforcement, the court can only enforce things that there are laws for. So if we don't have the ordinance in place, there's nothing to enforce.
Right.
And we can make changes with the court, but the city council's lane is not to make changes with the courts.
No.
That is outside their purview.
No.
All they can do is create the ordinances. Yeah. And then the court is responsible for their aspect of enforcing that. But citizens have a responsibility there with the courts. And that's not the city council's lane. I think that that's kind of a distraction. And aside from that, even if you take all of that as valid, saying there were 5 meetings on this is just bullshit, because there were readings on this and then they made amendments and then they brought it back. But there's no debate in the city council meeting unless it's on the 3rd reading.
Yes. And there was very little discussion at all about the specifics of the ordinance with the public in general. It was basically all wasn't kept under wraps. It just wasn't discussed because there was no public discussion, because they didn't read it. And when it was found out that there was this maintenance code issue, then some real estate folks said, we want to talk to the city about this, as is their right. And they started having working meetings or workshops about this 4 items, literally 4 items that would be added to an already, to our maintenance code.
And if you haven't followed, what ended up coming out of it, though, they did cut some of it, like the mold.
It was just going to be 2.
It was going to be, requiring carbon monoxide detectors if there is a source of carbon monoxide in the unit, like gas heat.
Yeah.
And if the rental unit has working air conditioning when a tenant moves in and it breaks or goes out, that the landlord would have to repair it within 10 days. I specifically talked to some of Mr. Frankhouse's tenants about that issue, that if their air conditioning went out right now when it's 100 degrees outside, what that would mean for them, how long it would take. And they said that they would expect it to take weeks, several weeks, before anything happened. And so, there are people whose this is like a tangible benefit to people that is very simple. It's not asking now if the unit didn't come with air conditioning,
right?
Yeah.
But it should be well expected that if I'm paying for something and then I don't have it a month later, but I'm paying for that same, I'm still paying the same amount of money. Are you going to charge me less rent to not have my air conditioner fixed? Then that could be negotiable, I would imagine. But if I'm paying $600 a month and my air conditioner goes out and I'm still paying $600 a month with no air conditioner, that just doesn't sound. And
state law doesn't give you a path to withhold that money.
Yeah.
And so if you withheld that money, you could literally be put in jail for not paying.
Because the state of Arkansas allows criminal proceedings for not paying rent. You get put in jail for not paying your rent.
You can be.
Yeah.
In Arkansas, you're not. Not everybody is, but you can be. It has been used. Sorry, Kim, I didn't mean to. She said she didn't say it was the council's responsibility. Just that enforcement in the court is the main problem. Fix that first. More code won't help until that root problem is addressed. I disagree with that, just in the sense that, like I said, if there's not a code on the books, there's nothing to enforce.
The current code isn't as enforceable as it. There's not enough meat to.
The air conditioning thing isn't even required right now. So if it goes out, there's nothing. There's no recourse. And so this would put that in place under a new state law that's going into effect. Now, we did talk about the issue with the courts and enforcement during some of the work sessions, because there is an option the council can take to strengthen that enforcement if they really care about it, and if that really is the core issue here, because they can increase the minimum fines.
Yes.
They can increase the minimums, and so that they have to be enforced at a higher standard. Now, there are limits to that. They can't go above certain things with the state. They can't create felony offenses, things like that. But the civil penalty for these code violations, they 100 could increase those. But let me tell you, that conversation is a non-starter with this city council. So they don't even want to talk about having the ordinance. They sure as hell don't want to talk about increasing the penalties for it. That became very clear when that came up in the meetings. It was like, whoa, don't get carried away now. When I say all that, Kim, I don't mean that to as towards your comment necessarily, just more about what I've talked about with the council members and things like that. But the other issue with this is that still won't work if the case gets tossed. I don't really understand how that's
saying if the judge throws out the case.
Well, the judge has to throw out the case if there's no ordinance.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If there's no ordinance, there's no violation, right? And so because there's things in here that there probably would be more violations if some of this was already in the ordinances. And I'm not saying that the issue with the courts is not a legitimate issue. The enforcement is a legitimate issue. It does need to be addressed, but the city council just can't address that. That's other than increasing the minimum. They can't, force the judge or do anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, how we can get the courts to take it more seriously, that's a question on here from Debbie, is one, I think we have to keep doing this with code enforcement, with reporting violations, making sure that he is going before the court. I think that a big thing is looking for somebody to run for that seat. That's been an issue for quite a long time. And it's not, a lot of people support Judge Bourne and like him. It's not like that, about him necessarily, but if on this issue, if this issue is about, if this is a key issue for you, then replacing him is an option. I don't really know, but there may be some options to file some complaints around, like just judicial ethics and how it's handled, if it's not being handled equitably to how other situations are handled. So we could look into that a little bit. I'm not totally sure, but the council could always, like I said, they could always increase those minimum fines and minimum requirements. And so we can definitely go that route if the council wants to do what they can to enforce it higher.
Debbie asked another question earlier, is there anything that can be done to prevent him from renting the properties? And aside from condemning properties, there's not a lot. I mean, and they can't just say, we don't like this guy, so we want to condemn his property. Like, there has to be reasons.
Although, if you look at some of those properties there are reasons, like some of the things we've seen, like I seen as I went through the file, is that they have, like they'll say that, okay, you must have this repaired within 10 days. And then they'll come back after 30 days and it's still not repaired. So like, well, if we come back in 60 days and it's not repaired, we're going to condemn this building. And then they'll come back and be like, okay, well, we come back in 90 days and it's not done. We're going to condemn this building. And so those things are under the city's purview to take action more quickly on that. And, that kind of falls within not just the council, but under the administration through like the mayor and the city attorney's office and things like that.
Yeah.
And something else to keep in mind, I meant to point out earlier, is when we talk about 200 code violations over 5 years, think about the cost to taxpayers that we've had on just sending people out there over and over. I mean, we're talking 5, 6, 10 violations a month sometimes on properties for years, the same properties having violations until they burn down. Some of them, there was property, and then finally the last note says burn down. And thank God, not with somebody in it.
Yeah.
Because, a question we had on here was like, do we want this to be like the condo in Florida, and that collapsed?
Yeah.
And I know that's a whole issue there with how that happened, but it is a serious thing to think about. Like, do we want to be a community where an apartment building burns down that we knew was unsafe and kills 10 people?
Yeah. Well, apparently there has been a death in one of his.
At least in one, and that was related to mold and asthma and some issues like that. But it is. It's dangerous. It's a miracle that nobody's died. Like that more people haven't died.
Well, and the city council hopefully will be readdressing this in their next meeting. I have encouraged Mr. Keller to bring it back up, and let's see what happens with that. And it would be great for those of you who care about this issue to contact your city council member and to say, hey, I don't know what way you were going to vote on that specific issue, but here's how I feel about it. Because I've not had a long time communicating with every city council member over the so many decades or whatever, but this council very much uses my constituents wanted this excuse.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And if they're going to use that excuse, then that puts the power upon you and the onus upon you to call them, say, well, this is what I want. If you're going to say to the media, this is why we voted this way, then I'm going to give you my information as to why I want you to vote this way. So,
and you can also, the district judge, Judge Bourne, is an elected official. Typically, judges should be immune from public pressure, because it's not meant to be really a political position.
Right.
But that's complicated when you elect them. So, you can reach out to the district judge's office and say, I'm concerned that these aren't being enforced. Yeah. That's not going to hurt anything. I don't know how much influence it'll have just because it's a different type of elected position where I've worked on some judicial campaigns, and it's very much like that. This is not like judges are hardcore, man. They don't they don't give a shit what you think about it, you know.
Play. Yeah.
I mean, that's just part of the job, I guess. But it's
their
still
job
cool,
is to interpret what the law says about whatever situation they're in front of. So some of them interpret it one way or the other, more staunch and less, You see the videos all the time about the judge who's like, this guy comes in because he had, whatever, and he's like real easy, and, it's all this like heartfelt, a nice judge, and then you go into Judge Bourne for a traffic violation.
Hey, there's some issues there. People have legitimate complaints, but I tell you what, that man has a snappy sense of humor.
He's been very kind to me.
I've never had a negative interaction with him personally. I've actually had some very positive interactions with him, but but I do think that if people are violating these codes, then they need to be held accountable for it.
Yes.
Because it is a real safety issue. I mean, it's just too important. And if one of these burns down, we have to send our firefighters have to risk their lives to go in there. I mean, there's just so many repercussions to this that fan out throughout our community when we're not taking care of this.
Well, and when you think about the way a city or a city government should function, and this is my opinion, is that there should be forward thinking, think towards progress. And if you can't look at a situation like this and see all of the many ways it could go bad, and how easy would it be to fix it? I mean, it's just fix it. Like, fix it. Fix this guy makes $5,000 a month from this one property. Fix it, And again, like, if you look at this and say who's responsible, well, obviously this guy's responsible for his properties, but the city has some culpability too. The district court has some culpability too for not holding him accountable, and that's why we elect them, is to hold us accountable and to make decisions in our best interests.
So this will be coming back to City Council. Councilman Keller's still working on this. He's planning to bring it back. Hopefully the council members will be a little more open to at least having public debate. I'm fine with if you get to the end of this and you say, hey, I feel like on the merits of this issue, this is not the right way to go, and I'm going to vote against it. I may disagree with you, but cutting it off before there's even a public debate without allowing it to go to public comment in the city council meetings on the third reading, which it never did. It never once went to that public comment period at the city council meeting. And that was because they refused to read it.
Yeah. And not even willing to hear other options of how we could make situations like this specific situation better. That was really what bothered me.
Yeah.
So, call your city council member, please.
You can call them and tell them you just think we're dumb and you disagree with us.
Yeah, you can call them and say...
They like hearing that, too.
They love to hear that you disagree with us. Oh, yes, I'm sure they have fun conversations about what we say sometimes. But as far as I know, they don't watch the show.
They probably don't.
Yeah.
If they're smart, they don't. But anywho, this was fun. I missed you when you were out.
Same.
It's good to see you.
I had a lot of fun.
You didn't miss us at all. Like you had a great time. He was just like, what else? I was eating crab legs.
I sat on the beach every day and hung out with my kids, and it was awesome.
That just sounds terrible.
Yeah. And my in-laws, it was a fun experience too.
That's good.
I have good in-laws. So.
Well.
But next week, hopefully, we will be talking about something even more exciting than slumlords in our area. Please, please, please share this video with your friends. Let them know what's going on in the River Valley area in local politics. And we will see you guys next Tuesday night at 7 on RBN.